Aliens found human, ships beyond the galaxy. Everyone was pointed at Earth. Captain Rhea Doss had flown to the edge of many things in her long life. She had flown to the edge of known space. She had flown to the edge of a black hole, close enough to feel her ship groan under the pull. She had even flown to the edge of her own patience, many times, with junior officers who asked too many questions at the wrong moment. But she had never flown to the edge of a galaxy before, and now that she was here, floating in the dark gap between one great spinning wheel of stars and the endless nothing beyond it, she understood why so few ships ever came this far. It was quiet, in a way that space was never quiet. Even in deep space, inside a galaxy, there was always something. A star far away, a cloud of gas catching light, a stray signal bouncing off an old satellite. Out here, past the last thin arm of the galaxy, there was almost nothing. Just black and cold, and the soft hum of her own ship keeping her alive. Her ship was called the Wanderer's Eye, a Korath survey vessel, built for long trips and lonely places. It was not a warship. It carried no weapons worth mentioning, only sensors, scanners, and enough fuel to go somewhere no one had gone before and come back to tell the story. That was the whole point of her mission. The wide assembly, the great alliance of worlds that Rhea's people belonged to, always wanted more maps, more knowledge, more stars marked down and understood. It was a slow, careful, patient kind of work, and Rhea loved it. She was Korath, tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 dark eyes that could see far into the red and far into the violet, past what many species could manage. Her people were old and careful. They did not rush into things. They believed that the galaxy was too big and too dangerous to explore in a hurry, so the wide assembly had spent thousands of years slowly mapping star by star, system by system, always looking, always asking, rarely fighting. It had made them wealthy in knowledge, if not always exciting to talk to at parties. On this trip, her ship's job was simple. Go past the edge of the galaxy. See if there was anything worth mapping in the dark gap before the next galaxy over. Most likely, there would be nothing. A few stray rocks. Some ancient light from stars too far to matter. Nobody expected much. That was why, when the sensors began screaming at 2 in the ship's morning cycle, Rhea nearly fell out of her sleeping frame. "Report," she said, still half asleep, pulling herself toward the control chair. Her second officer, a quiet young Korath named Tel Arnu, was already awake and staring at the main screen with all 4 eyes wide open. "Captain, I don't understand what I'm looking at." "That's usually where you start explaining anyway," Rhea said, sitting down. "Show me." The screen filled with dots, hundreds of them, then thousands. They were spread out across a huge area of empty space, far larger than any asteroid field Rhea had ever mapped. At first, she thought it might be a natural cluster of rocks or ice, something left over from a galaxy's formation, drifting quietly in the dark. But the shapes were wrong for rocks. Too straight, too even, too built. "Metal," Tel said. "All metal, or mostly metal. The scanners are picking up alloys we don't have a match for in our database. And Captain, look at the size of some of these things." Rhea leaned closer. Some of the dots on the screen were tiny, barely bigger than a shuttle. Others were massive, longer than 10 Korath cruisers placed end to end. And they were all still, not drifting in different directions the way debris usually did after some disaster. Not tumbling. Just still, hanging in space, facing the same way. "Take us closer," Rhea said. "Slow, half power. I want full scans running the whole way in." The Wanderer's Eye moved forward, gentle and careful, the way Rhea always moved when she did not understand what she was looking at. As the ship crept nearer, the shapes on the screen became clearer and clearer, until finally the ship's outer cameras could see them directly, and Rhea stood up from her chair without meaning to. They were ships, not natural rocks, not asteroids, ships. Old ships by the look of them, covered in the kind of dust and frost that only built up after centuries, maybe longer, drifting untouched in the freezing dark. Their hulls were a dull gray-white, scarred by tiny meteor strikes, but still holding their shape. Long, narrow hulls, round sections that looked like they were meant to spin for gravity. Panels that might once have held solar collectors, now dead and dark. And there were so many of them. Rhea had thought, at first look, that maybe 100 ships were out here. As the wanderer's eye kept moving, the true number kept climbing. 200, 500, 1,000. They stretched out across the dark gap between galaxies like a slow, silent parade, frozen forever in place. "Captain," Tell said quietly, "none of these match anything in the assembly database. Not the hull design, not the metal, not the engine ports. This isn't Korath work. It isn't Yathiri work. It isn't Bond Collective work either. I've checked every registered species we know." "So it's someone new," Rhea said, though her voice came out slower than she meant it to. New was supposed to be exciting. New was the whole reason she had signed up for survey work in the first place. But something about the stillness of this place, the endless rows of dead ships hanging silent in the dark, far beyond any known star, made the back of her neck feel cold in a way that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. "Bring us alongside the nearest large one," she said. "Full scan. Do not attempt contact yet. If there's any power signature at all, I want to know before we get close enough to wake it up." The ship drifted closer and closer until the nearest of the giant derelicts filled almost the whole front screen. It was easily 2 kilometers long, a huge cylinder with smaller sections branching off it like ribs, the kind of shape a species might use for a colony ship, something meant to carry thousands of people across the stars for generations. Its surface was pitted and worn, but here and there Rhea could see faint markings, symbols she did not recognize, arranged in careful rows along the hull. Some kind of writing, some kind of language. "No power signature," Tell reported after a long minute. "It's cold, dead, has been for..." "Captain, the wear patterns suggest centuries, maybe longer." "Centuries," Rhea repeated. She looked at the huge ship on the screen, this enormous, silent thing that some unknown species had built with such care, only to leave it here, in the emptiest, loneliest place a ship could be left. Why would anyone bring a ship like this, all the way out here to die? "Maybe they didn't bring it," Tell said. "Maybe it drifted." "Ships don't drift in formation, Tell. Look at them. They're not scattered like debris from a battle or an accident. They're arranged, spaced out, evenly, almost like..." Rhea stopped, frowning, and pulled up the full scan on her own screen, the one showing the whole graveyard from a wide view instead of up close. That was when she saw it, and once she saw it, she could not stop seeing it. Every single ship, no matter its size, no matter its shape, no matter how different one design was from another, and there were many different designs here, Rhea realized now, this was not one fleet but many kinds of ships, maybe built across a very long stretch of time. Every single one of them was facing the same direction. Not tumbling, not scattered, facing. Their noses, or whatever counted as the front of each strange vessel, were all turned the same way, pointed like 1,000 silent arrows towards somewhere deep inside the galaxy behind them. "Tell," Rhea said slowly, "pull up a star chart. I want to know exactly what's in the direction these ships are pointing." It took a few minutes for the navigation computer to work out the angle precisely, cross-referencing the position of each of the nearest ships, checking and rechecking to make sure it was not some strange trick of the eye. When the answer came up on the screen, it was a single star system, marked in the assembly's charts only as a distant, unremarkable point of light, near the edge of a spiral arm, many thousands of light-years away. A yellow star, a handful of planets. Nothing special, as far as the old assembly surveys had noted, generations ago, when a single automated probe had passed through that region and moved on without stopping. "It has a name in our database," Tell said, voice a little unsteady now. "One of the old automated surveys logged it. They called the third planet Sol 3. No, wait. There's a note here from the survey team. The star system had an internal name that came from a radio signal. They called their own star Sol. They called the planet Earth." Rhea sat very still for a long moment, looking at the small yellow dot on the star chart, and then looking back at the screen full of endless silent ships, all facing that same small dot, across a distance so vast it made her chest ache to think about. "Every ship out here," she said quietly, "no matter how old, no matter how different, is pointed at the same planet." "Yes, Captain." "How many ships have we counted so far?" Tell checked the sensor logs. "We're still counting, but at the rate we're picking up new contacts as we move deeper into the field, it could be in the thousands, possibly many thousands." Rhea thought about that. Thousands of ships, built across what looked like a very long span of time, by a species the wide assembly had never properly met, gathered here in the loneliest, emptiest stretch of space anyone could imagine. Every single one of them turned like a compass needle toward one small yellow star. It did not look like a graveyard anymore, not to her. A graveyard was where things went to be forgotten. This did not feel forgotten. This felt like something else entirely, something Rhea did not yet have a word for, and that unsettled her more than anything a hostile alien fleet could have done. "Send a priority report back to Assembly Command," she said. "Tell them we've found something. Tell them it's big. And tell them—" She paused, choosing her words carefully, because she knew whatever she said next would be read by people far more important than her, people who would decide what happened next. "Tell them we've found what looks like the remains of an entire species fleet, spread across a vast stretch of space, and every one of them is facing the same direction, toward a single star system. I recommend we treat this as first priority, unknown contact protocol." Tell's fingers moved over the console, sending the message out into the dark, where it would take time to reach anyone, the way all messages did across such distances. Then he turned back to the screen, staring at the endless field of silent ships stretching out before them. "Captain," he said, "what do you think it means? All of them pointing the same way?" Rhea did not answer right away. She looked at the nearest derelict again, at its worn hull and its strange, careful markings, and she found herself thinking not about the ship's design, or its metal, or its age, but about the people who must have built it. Whoever they were, they had made thousands of these things, sent them out across the stars, and somehow, whether by chance or by choice, they had ended up here, at the very edge of everything, all facing home. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I don't think it was an accident. Ships don't line themselves up like that on their own. Someone did this. Someone gathered these ships, every single one, and turned them to face that star. Why would anyone do that?" Rhea looked at the small yellow dot on the star chart one more time before she answered. "I think," she said slowly, "we might be looking at a message. And I think it's been waiting a very long time for someone to read it." Over the next several hours, the Wanderer's eye moved carefully through the outer edge of the great field, mapping as it went, cataloging ship after ship, without daring to get too close to any of them. Rhea kept the ship's weapons systems, what few it had, on standby, though she doubted they would matter if this graveyard turned out to be a trap. Whoever had built these ships clearly had technology the assembly did not fully understand, and if even one of them still had power, still had teeth, a lone survey vessel would be in serious trouble. But nothing moved. Nothing woke. The field remained as silent and still as it had been when they first arrived. Thousands of dead ships hanging in the dark, patient as stone, all facing that same distant point of light. Rhea found herself walking the length of her small ship late that night, if night meant anything out here, unable to sleep, her mind circling back again and again to the image of all those ships turned the same way. She had seen battlefields before, or the remains of them, scattered wrecks left behind after some conflict between rival systems. She had seen colony failures, whole fleets lost to some disaster, their remains drifting apart in slow, sad spirals. She had never seen anything like this. Order in the middle of so much death, purpose in the middle of so much silence. It was Tell who found the first real clue, near the end of their second day mapping the field. He called Rhea to the science station, his 4 eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and something close to fear. "Captain, I found one that's different," he said. "Most of these ships are completely dead. No power, no systems, nothing. But this one," he pointed at a smaller derelict on the screen, tucked between 2 much larger ones, almost hidden in their shadow. "This one still has a power signature. Very faint. But it's there." Rhea felt her pulse quicken. "Life support?" "No, nothing like that. It's too small, too weak. I think it might just be a single system, still drawing a trickle of power. Maybe a data core. Maybe something meant to last." "Meant to last how long?" Tell looked at her, and in his eyes Rhea could see he already understood what she was about to ask. "Centuries, Captain. Maybe longer. Whatever's still running in there, someone built it to keep running. Long after everything else on that ship had gone cold and quiet. Someone wanted it to survive." Rhea looked at the small derelict on the screen, sitting quietly among its silent, frozen neighbors, still holding on to some tiny spark of life after all this time, still facing, like all the others, toward that small yellow star so very far away. "Bring us alongside," she said, carefully. "I think it's time we found out what these people wanted us to hear." The Wanderer's eye turned toward the small ship, engines glowing faintly against the endless black, and behind it, unseen and unmoving, thousands of silent vessels watched them go, every one of them still pointed, patiently, steadily, toward home. Aliens found human ships beyond the galaxy. Everyone was pointed at Earth. The small derelict was called, as far as Tell could translate from the worn markings near its hull, something close to Long Watch. The name meant nothing to Rhea at first, just a string of symbols matched loosely against an old, thin dictionary the assembly had built from a handful of recovered human artifacts over the years. Artifacts nobody had thought much about until now. But as the Wanderer's eye drew alongside the little ship, matching its slow drift, Rhea found the name settling into her mind and refusing to leave. Long Watch. It felt like the right name for a ship that had waited here, alone, for longer than most civilizations lasted. "Sending a boarding drone first," Rhea said. "I'm not putting any crew inside a ship we don't understand, not until we know it's safe." Tell nodded and guided the small round drone out from the Wanderer's eye's cargo bay. It drifted across the gap between the two ships, lights blinking, cameras recording everything, and settled gently against a section of the Long Watch's hull, where the metal had worn thin enough to show a seam. It took almost an hour of careful, patient work before the drone managed to force the old airlock open, its metal groaning in complaints that had clearly not been heard in a very long time. Inside, the drone's lights showed a corridor coated in frost, the air long gone, the walls lined with cracked panels and dead screens. It moved slowly, sending images back to the Wanderer's eye, and Rhea watched every frame with a growing, uneasy fascination. This had been a working ship once. She could see chairs, storage lockers, the shapes of what might have been sleeping berths, all built to a scale that suggested creatures not too different in size from Korath, maybe a little shorter, a little broader. "There," Tell said, pointing at the screen. "That section there, near the back. That's where the power signature is coming from." The drone turned down a narrow side passage and came to a room that looked different from the rest of the ship. Where everything else had been left plain and practical, this room had been built with more care. The walls here were smoother, lined with what might once have been decorative panels, though frost and time had worn away whatever color or pattern they once held. In the center of the room sat a single console, dark and silent except for one small light, blinking slowly, faithfully, in the freezing dark. "That's it," Tell said. "That's the power source. It's some kind of memory core, built to run almost nothing. Just enough to keep a tiny bit of data alive." "Can you access it?" Tell worked at his console for a long time, running careful diagnostics, checking and rechecking for any hidden defenses or traps, before he dared connect the drone's systems to the ancient machine. Finally, he looked up at Rhea, his eyes bright. "I think so, Captain, but I want to warn you. Whatever's on this thing, we might not understand it at all. It's not built in any language or code the assembly has on file." "Try anyway," Rhea said, slowly, carefully. "If it looks like it's going to do anything dangerous, cut the connection immediately." The connection took shape slowly, line by line, as the drone's systems worked to make sense of ancient, unfamiliar code. It was strange work, watching numbers and symbols scroll past that meant nothing to anyone on the Wanderer's eye, waiting for some kind of translation to take hold. It was nearly 3 hours before the first piece of readable data appeared on the screen. A short burst of text, translated roughly by the ship's language systems, working hard to match old human words against known patterns from across the galaxy. The first words that appeared were simple, and they hit Rhea harder than she expected. "If you are reading this," the translation said, "you found us. Thank you for stopping. Please listen." The bridge went very quiet. "Keep going," Rhea said softly. More text followed, slow and halting, the translation software clearly struggling with parts of it, filling in gaps with best guesses, marking uncertain words with small question marks. But even broken and incomplete, the meaning came through clear enough to make every hair on Rhea's arms rise. "My name was Aiko Ren," the log said. "I was the last living person aboard the Long Watch. This ship was built 211 years ago. back when Earth still believed we could reach the stars beyond our own galaxy and find somewhere new to live. We were wrong about a lot of things back then. We were wrong about how far we could go. We were wrong about how long it would take. Most of us who left on this ship, and ships like it, knew we would never see Earth again. We knew our children would grow old out here, in the dark, far from everything we came from. Some of us made peace with that. Some of us never did. The log paused, then continued, and Rhea realized with a small shock that the recording had clearly been made and remade many times, different sections added at different points, as if whoever had left this message had come back to it again and again over a long life, unable to stop adding to it. We called this the Long Return Project. Every ship Earth ever built to go this far, every colony ship, every survey ship, every ship that carried people out past the edge of what we understood, was built with the same rule. No matter how far you go, no matter how lost you become, you build your ship so it can always be turned to face home, even if you never make it back. Even if your engines die, and your crew grows old and passes away out here in the dark, your ship faces Earth. That was the rule. That was the promise every builder made to every crew before they ever left port. We are not the kind of people who stop reaching for home, even when home is impossible to reach. Rhea found herself leaning forward without meaning to, every one of her eyes fixed on the slow-scrolling words. I don't know if anyone will ever find this ship, the log went on. I don't know if anyone from Earth is even still out here looking, after all these years, or if anyone from somewhere else entirely will be the one to read this. If you are not human, if you are some other kind of person from some other kind of world, I want you to know something important, because I think it matters more than anything else I could tell you. We were not a great empire. We never conquered the stars. Most of the ships out here with me failed. Engines broke. Supplies ran short. Whole generations were born and died between one star and the next, having never once seen the sky their grandparents remembered. This was not a story of triumph. This was a story of people who kept trying anyway, long after trying stopped making any kind of sense, because giving up was the one thing we could never quite bring ourselves to do. Tell looked over at Rhea, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain, there's more. A lot more. It looks like she recorded entries over years, maybe decades. Keep it running, Rhea said. I want to hear all of it. The log continued, jumping across time in uneven pieces, sometimes years apart, the voice behind the words growing older with each new entry, though of course there was no actual voice, only the flat translated text scrolling across the screen. Aiko Ren spoke of the ship's slow decline, of systems failing one by one, of a crew that had once numbered in the hundreds shrinking down across generations to a handful, and finally, in the last years, to just her. My grandmother was on this ship when it launched, one entry read. She used to tell me about Earth, though she had only seen it through old pictures and stories her own parents told her, since she was born a year after launch, already out here in the dark. She said Earth had blue skies and green land, and oceans that went on forever. I have never seen any of that myself. None of us aboard this ship, not for 3 generations now, have ever set foot on solid ground beneath an open sky. And still, when the engineers built this ship's final course correction system, all those decades ago, back before I was even born, they made sure it could still be adjusted to keep our nose pointed toward home. Even when we knew we would never get there. Even when it made no practical difference at all. We faced home anyway. Because that is what you do. Rhea sat back slowly in her chair, letting that thought settle over her. A species that built ships with no realistic chance of ever returning, and still built in the ability, the tradition, the promise, to keep facing home no matter what. It was not efficient. It was not practical. By every measure the wide assembly usually used to judge a design, it was almost pointless. And yet here it was, working exactly as intended, more than 2 centuries later, in the coldest, loneliest place in the galaxy. There's a final entry, Tell said quietly. It's marked differently from the others. I think it's the last one she ever made. Play it, Rhea said. The final entry was short, shorter than any of the others, as if Aiko Ren had known, by the time she recorded it, that there would not be much time or strength left for anything longer. I am the last one now, the words read. Everyone else aboard the Long Watch has passed on, and I do not think I have much time left myself. I have set the ship's final systems to preserve this log for as long as possible, powered by the smallest trickle of energy our old reactor can still manage, hoping that someday, somehow, someone will come far enough out here to find it. I do not know if that someone will be human. I do not know if Earth even remembers ships like ours anymore, after all this time. But if you are reading this, whoever you are, please know one thing. We never stopped facing home. Not for one single day, across 200 years and 4 generations, did this ship ever point anywhere else. We may have failed to get back, but we never stopped trying, and we never stopped hoping that someone from home might come looking for us, the same way we never stopped looking toward them. If you find more ships out here, know that every single one of them made the same promise we did. We are still facing home. We will always be facing home. Please, if you ever meet anyone from Earth, tell them the Long Watch kept its promise until the very end. The log ended there. The small blinking light on the screen dimmed slightly, as if even the effort of playing back its message one more time had cost it something precious, some last reserve of power it could not easily replace. Nobody on the bridge of the Wanderer's Eye spoke for a long moment. "Captain," Tell finally said, his voice unsteady, "there are thousands of ships out here. If even a fraction of them carry logs like this one." "Then we're not looking at a graveyard," Rhea said quietly. "We're looking at a promise. Thousands of promises, kept by thousands of people who never made it home, all facing the same direction, all still waiting." She sat with that thought for a while, staring at the small dead light on the screen, and thinking about the word Aiko Ren had used again and again throughout her recordings. Home. Not conquest, not glory, not even survival. Exactly, since so many of these ships had clearly failed in the end. Just home, and the refusal to stop facing it, no matter what. "Send this recording back to Assembly Command with our next report," Rhea said, along with a note. "Tell them I believe we have found evidence of an old and very determined species, one that built ships not just to explore, but to remember. Tell them I recommend we proceed toward the star system these ships are pointed at, with extreme caution and the greatest possible respect." "Understood, Captain," Tell said, already working the console. Rhea looked back at the small dark ship floating alongside them, this tiny, patient vessel that had carried a message across 2 centuries of silence, waiting the whole time for someone to come and listen. She thought about the thousands of other ships stretching out behind them across the dark gap between galaxies, each one built by the same careful, stubborn hands, each one carrying its own small piece of the same promise. "We're going to need a bigger ship than mine for what comes next," she said quietly. "Send word to Assembly Command. Tell them I want a full survey fleet out here within the month, and tell them to prepare a proper diplomatic team. If even half of what's in that recording is true, then whatever we find at the end of this trail is not something a single survey ship should be meeting alone." Tell nodded, already composing the message, but before he sent it, he paused and looked back at Rhea with a strange expression on his face, something between wonder and unease. "Captain, do you think Earth still exists? After everything in that recording, 200 years of ships being lost, generations dying out here in the dark, all of it seems so." He struggled for the word, fragile. "Do you think whatever built the Long Watch is even still around?" Rhea thought about the small yellow star marked on their charts, sitting quietly at the far end of a line drawn by thousands of silent, patient ships, and she found she did not have a simple answer. "I don't know," she admitted, "but a species that builds this kind of promise into every ship it ever sends out, even the ones it knows will never come back. I don't think that's the kind of species that simply disappears. I think we need to go and see for ourselves." Outside the small windows of the Wanderer's Eye, the endless field of silent ships stretched out into the dark, patient and still, every one of them facing the same distant point of light, waiting, as they had always waited, for someone to finally come looking. Aliens found human, ships beyond the galaxy. Everyone was pointed at Earth. It took the wide assembly 6 weeks to gather a proper fleet and send it back out to the ship graveyard beyond the galaxy's edge. Rhea spent most of that time still out there with the Wanderer's Eye, cataloging more of the silent derelicts, sending back reports full of numbers and measurements that could never quite capture what it felt like to drift among so many quiet, patient ships. By the time the first assembly cruisers arrived, she had counted over 11,000 separate vessels, and the survey was still nowhere near finished. The new fleet was led by a heavy cruiser called the Patient Word, carrying a proper diplomatic team, a full science division, and enough firepower to make even Rhea feel a little safer, though she was not entirely sure firepower would matter if things went wrong out here. Commanding the fleet was an older Koreth named Vesa Oram, a careful, serious officer who had spent decades working first contact protocols and had a reputation for never once starting a fight she could avoid. "Captain Doss," Vesa said, when their two ships finally linked up, her voice carrying over the comm, with the calm, measured tone of someone who had learned long ago never to sound too excited about anything. "Walk me through what you've found." Rhea did, laying out everything: the endless field of ships, the recording from the Long Watch, the strange and stubborn promise built into every single vessel out here. Vesa listened without interrupting, her four eyes narrowing slightly at certain points, though she said nothing until Rhea had finished. "A species that builds monuments to its own failures," Vesa said finally, "and sends them out to face home forever. That is either the saddest thing I have heard in my career, or the most impressive. I am not yet certain which." "I don't think it's meant to be sad," Rhea said. "I think it's meant to be a promise. We never stop trying to get home. Even after we're gone, the ship keeps facing home for us." Vesa was quiet for a moment. "And you believe this species still exists, after all this loss?" "I believe we need to find out," Rhea said. "That star system is still marked in our old surveys. A yellow star, a handful of planets, one automated probe passed generations ago that noted signs of technological activity and moved on without stopping to investigate further. Whoever built these ships had a home to come back to once. I want to know if they still do." Vesa considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, we proceed, carefully. If this species built thousands of ships with a rule like the one you describe, then whatever they built to actually defend their home may be considerably more serious than anything we've encountered out here in this graveyard. I want full caution protocols in place the moment we cross back into the galaxy proper." The combined fleet moved out a few days later, 6 ships strong, following the long, careful trail marked out by the silent derelicts behind them. It was slow going. The assembly did not believe in rushing into the unknown, and Vesa was even more cautious than most, insisting on regular scans, regular check-ins, regular pauses to make sure nothing was creeping up on them from any direction. Rhea found the pace frustrating at times, though she understood the reasoning well enough. Whatever waited for them at the far end of this trail had already surprised them once. There was no reason to assume it would not surprise them again. It was on the 9th day back inside galactic space, still many weeks from the small yellow star marked on their charts, that the fleet ran into something that made even the most careful members of the crew go very still. "Contact," the sensor officer on the patient word called out, her voice sharp and immediate. "Large object, directly ahead, matching the profile of the derelicts we've catalogued. But Captain, this one isn't dead." Vesa's voice came over the fleet channel a moment later, calm but firm. "All ships, hold position, report details." Rhea pulled up her own scans, watching as the details filled in. The object ahead was massive, larger than almost anything they had found in the graveyard. A great dark shape drifting silently in open space, far from any star, far from anything at all. Unlike the thousands of dead ships they had already catalogued, this one showed a clear, steady power signature, strong enough to register even at this distance. "It's not moving," Tell reported from beside her. "No active engines. No sign of active weapons as far as I can tell. But whatever's powering it, it's not some tiny memory core like the Long Watch. This is a real reactor, still running." "Could it be a warning system?" Vesa asked over the comm. "Some kind of guardian, left out here to watch the trail back to their home system?" "It's possible," Rhea said slowly, studying the shape on her screen. It was different from the colony ships and survey vessels they had found in the graveyard, sleeker, more angular, built along lines that suggested speed and strength rather than long, slow travel. "This doesn't look like the others. This looks like it was built to fight, not to carry people home." "All ships, maintain distance," Vesa ordered. "Science team, begin passive scans only. I do not want to risk waking whatever is aboard that vessel until we understand what we're dealing with." The fleet held position for nearly 2 full days, running every scan they could manage, without getting close enough to provoke a response, slowly building a picture of the strange, silent warship drifting ahead of them. It was old, That much was clear from the wear on its hull, though nowhere near as old as some of the derelicts they had already found. Its design suggested it had been built sometime after the Long Watch, perhaps by a later generation of the same species, working with better tools and harder lessons learned. "There are markings on the hull," Tell reported eventually, magnifying an image on the main screen, different from what we saw on the Long Watch. Sharper, more formal, almost like a military designation. He worked at his console for a while longer, cross-referencing the strange symbols against everything the translation database had managed to piece together so far. "I think this one has a name too. Best translation I can manage is something like Sentinel or Watcher. The exact meaning is a little uncertain, but it's definitely some kind of guard designation." "A guard for what?" Vesa asked, her voice tight over the comm. "For the trail behind it, maybe," Rhea said, studying the ship's position relative to the star chart. "Look where it's sitting, right in the middle of the path between the graveyard and the home system. If I were building a species-wide promise to always face home, and I knew that promise stretched out across a trail marked by thousands of vulnerable, unarmed ships, I might want something out here watching that trail too." "You think it's meant to protect the graveyard," Vesa said. "I think it's meant to protect the memory," Rhea said. "Whatever these people are, they clearly care very deeply about honoring the ones who never made it home. It wouldn't surprise me if somewhere along the way, someone decided that memory deserved a guardian." They debated for another full day before Vesa finally gave the order to make careful, controlled contact. A small unmanned probe was sent ahead, broadcasting every peaceful signal pattern the Assembly's diplomatic archives could offer, moving slowly and predictably, giving the silent warship every possible chance to recognize the approach as non-hostile. For a long, tense stretch of time, nothing happened. The probe drifted closer and closer, its cameras sending back a steadily growing image of the great dark ship, until finally, when it was close enough to make out fine details on the hull, something changed. Lights flickered along the length of the ancient warship, faint at first, then stronger, spreading section by section like something slowly waking from a very long sleep. On the bridge of the patient word, every officer went rigid, hands hovering over controls, waiting to see what would happen next. "Power signature climbing," the sensor officer called out, reactor output increasing. "Captain, I think it's coming online." "Hold position," Vesa said, her voice steady, despite the tension Rhea could hear underneath it. "Do not engage." "Repeat, do not engage unless directly threatened." The ancient warship's lights continued to spread, section by section, until at last a low, steady hum could be picked up by the probe's sensors, the unmistakable sound of old systems stirring back to life, after who knew how many years of silence. And then, slowly, the great dark ship began to turn, its massive bulk rotating with surprising smoothness for something so old, until its front, if it could be called that, was facing directly toward the approaching probe, and beyond it, toward the small fleet of assembly ships waiting cautiously in the distance. For a long, breathless moment, nothing else happened. Then, faint and crackling with age, a signal reached out from the ancient warship, carried on frequencies the assembly's translation system struggled to parse. It took several long minutes of careful work before Tell managed to piece together a rough translation, and when he read it aloud, his voice shook slightly. "Unknown vessel," the message read. "You are approaching a protected route. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. If you mean harm to what lies ahead, know that you are not the first to try, and you will not succeed." Rhea felt a chill run through her. Not from fear exactly, but from something closer to awe. Whatever had built this ship, whatever had programmed it to wait out here for who knew how long, ready to wake and issue exactly this kind of warning, had done so with remarkable care and remarkable patience. This was not some blind automated defense system lashing out at anything that came near. This was a guardian, deliberate and measured, giving strangers a chance to explain themselves before deciding what to do. "Send our own identification," Vesa ordered. "Full transparency. Tell them who we are, where we come from, and why we're here. Tell them about the Long Watch. Tell them we mean no harm, and that we wish only to understand." The message took time to compose properly, translated as carefully as the Assembly's best linguists could manage, built around the fragments of human language they had already gathered from the Long Watch's recording. It described the wide assembly, its long history of careful, peaceful exploration, its discovery of the great ship graveyard, and its deep respect for what it had found there. It ended with a simple, honest request: permission to continue toward the home system, in peace, in hopes of finally meeting the species that had built such an extraordinary monument to memory and promise. The response, when it came, took even longer to translate, the ancient warship systems clearly straining to compose something more complex than its first simple warning. But when the words finally scrolled across the screen, they carried a weight that settled over the entire bridge of the patient word. This vessel has waited 236 years for someone to come and ask that question honestly, the message read. In that time, others have come this way with less peaceful intentions, and this vessel dealt with them accordingly. You are the first to identify yourselves fully and request passage, rather than attempt to force it. For that, you have earned the chance to proceed. But know this: the promise carried by every ship you found in the field behind you is not simply a monument, it is a warning, as much as a memory. We do not forget those who tried to come home and could not, and we do not forget those who stood in their way. The message paused, then continued, the translation growing steadier, as the ancient systems seemed to settle into whatever pattern they had been built to follow. You may proceed toward the home system. This vessel will follow at a distance, as is its duty. What you find there is no longer within this vessel's authority to explain. That choice belongs to the ones still living, if any remain to make it. Travel safely, strangers. And should you meet any of my people along the way, tell them the Sentinel line has held. Every ship it was built to guard is still facing home. The message ended there, and slowly, the lights along the ancient warship's hull dimmed once more, though the low hum of its reactor did not fade entirely, as if it intended to remain alert, even now, even as it allowed the strangers to pass. On the bridge of the patient word, nobody spoke for a long moment. Finally, Vesa broke the silence, her voice quieter than Rhea had ever heard it. 236 years, she said. Alone out here, waiting, still following its orders, still protecting a trail nobody else remembered existed. Captain Doss, what kind of species builds something like this, and then simply leaves it here to keep a promise for centuries after anyone thought to check on it? Rhea looked out at the great dark shape drifting silently in the distance, its lights fading but not gone, patient and watchful even now, and she thought of the small recording left behind by a woman named Aiko Ren, who had spent her whole life aboard a dying ship, still facing home until her very last breath. I think, she said slowly, we're about to find out. The fleet moved forward once more, the ancient sentinel falling in slowly behind them, and ahead, somewhere among the countless stars of the galaxy, the small yellow sun-marked Sol continued to burn, waiting, as it always had, for its ships to finally come home. Aliens found human ships beyond the galaxy. Everyone was pointed at Earth. The journey toward the yellow star, called Sol, took nearly 2 months, even at the fleet's best speed, and for most of that time, the ancient warship called the Sentinel followed at a steady, silent distance, never closing in, never falling behind, simply watching. Rhea grew almost used to its presence on her sensors, a quiet reminder that whatever waited ahead of them had not forgotten how to defend itself, even after centuries of silence. As the fleet drew closer to human space, the assembly's automated survey records began to fill in with more detail, pulled from old passive scans the assembly had gathered decades earlier, but never followed up on. There were signs of activity around the yellow star, faint radio signals, patterns of light on the third planet that suggested cities, later scans that showed clear evidence of orbital structures. Whatever species had once launched thousands of ships out into the dark clearly still had a home to return to, even if the assembly had never bothered to properly introduce itself. There's something odd about the signal patterns, Tell said one evening, several weeks into the journey, frowning at his console. The oldest recordings we have from this system, going back almost 100 years, show a species just beginning to reach into space. Simple satellites, early radio broadcasts, that kind of thing. But the ships we found in the graveyard, some of them are far more advanced than that. Faster engines, better hull materials, more complex ship or life support systems. Meaning what? Rhea asked. Meaning either 2 different periods of technology got mixed together in that graveyard by accident, Tell said, or this species developed unbelievably fast. Faster than almost anything the assembly has on record. If the oldest human broadcasts we can trace are only about 100 years old, and yet we found ships out there that were centuries old when we scanned them, with technology far beyond anything a species that young should have. He trailed off, and Rhea finished the thought for him. Then either our dating is wrong, or they didn't grow slowly and carefully the way we did. They grew in leaps. Something pushed them forward fast. Loss does that sometimes, Vesa said over the comm, having listened quietly to the exchange. Species that face great hardship early on sometimes develop faster than species that grow up comfortable. Necessity can be a harsh teacher, but an effective one. Rhea thought about the long watch, about generations of humans born and dying aboard a dying ship, never once seeing open sky. And she thought about the Sentinel, waiting alone for over 2 centuries to protect a trail of memory nobody else remembered. If a species could build things like that, driven not by comfort but by loss and stubborn hope, then perhaps rapid growth should not have surprised her at all. The fleet crossed into the outer edge of the Sol system on a quiet morning, ship time, and immediately, every sensor aboard every vessel lit up with new information. This was not the sparse, half-formed technological signature Rhea had expected from a species barely a century into space travel. Orbital stations circled several planets. Automated mining operations worked steadily among the system's asteroid belts. And further in, closer to the yellow star itself, a network of defense platforms ringed the third planet, in careful, overlapping patterns, clearly built by people who understood both engineering and caution in equal measure. That's not a young species defense network, Vesa said quietly, studying the readings. That's the kind of system a species builds after learning, the hard way, that they cannot afford to be caught unprepared. Multiple contacts, the sensor officer called out suddenly. Ships, converging on our position. Fast. The bridge went tense in an instant. On the main screen, a cluster of new signals appeared, moving with impressive speed from somewhere deeper in the system, closing the distance far more quickly than assembly protocol usually accounted for during first contact scenarios. All ships, hold position, Vesa ordered immediately. Weapons on standby only, do not power up offensive systems. Broadcast our identification and peaceful intentions on every frequency we have. The message went out, the same careful, respectful greeting the assembly had prepared, translated, as best they could, into the fragments of human language, pulled from the Long Watch's old recordings. For a tense stretch of minutes, there was no response, only the steady approach of the unknown ships, until finally they came close enough for visual confirmation. They were smaller than the assembly cruisers, sleek and fast, built along efficient, purposeful lines that reminded Rhea uncomfortably of the ancient Sentinel far behind them. There were a dozen of them, arranged in a careful formation, and as they drew near, they slowed, matching the fleet's position, at a respectful but clearly cautious distance. A new signal came through, this one clearer, stronger, clearly generated by a living crew, rather than an ancient automated system. The translation took only a few moments this time, the assembly's systems having grown far more capable after weeks of study. Unknown fleet, you are inside a protected system. Please confirm your identity and your intentions before proceeding further. Vesa took a slow breath before responding, and Rhea could hear the careful weight in every word she chose. We are a survey and diplomatic fleet from the wide assembly, a peaceful alliance of many worlds. We come in response to something we found far beyond your galaxy's edge, a great field of ships, thousands of them, all facing this system. We found a recording, left by one of your people, aboard a ship called the Long Watch. We wish only to understand what we found, and to meet the people who built it, in peace. There was a long pause after the message went out, long enough that Rhea began to wonder if something had gone wrong with the translation. Then the response came, and this time, there was something different in the tone of it, something that even the assembly's careful translation software could not entirely smooth away. You found the Long Watch, the message read. That ship has been listed as lost for over 200 years. Please hold your position. We are sending a representative to meet with you directly. The wait that followed felt longer than it likely was. Rhea spent it standing at the front viewport of the Wanderer's Eye, staring out at the small formation of human ships holding position nearby, and beyond them, the pale blue and white curve of the third planet, Earth, hanging distant but clearly visible against the black. It was strange, she thought, to have traveled so far, through so much silence and so many centuries of patient waiting, only to arrive at last and find a living, breathing world exactly where the old ships had always pointed. Whatever losses this species had suffered along the way, whatever ships had been left behind in that vast, silent graveyard, they had not stopped this small yellow star system from growing into something clearly strong and capable. A single ship eventually broke away from the human formation and approached the patient word directly, requesting docking clearance in a tone that was cautious but not hostile. Vesa granted it immediately, and within the hour, word came through that a human representative had boarded the assembly flagship and wished to speak with the fleet commanders directly. Rhea was invited aboard the patient word for the meeting, along with Tel, both of them still wearing the careful, formal manner the assembly trained into every officer for moments exactly like this one. When they arrived at the meeting room, Rhea found herself unexpectedly nervous, her 4 eyes fixed on the door as it slid open to admit their guest. The human who stepped through was shorter than Rhea, with dark hair streaked gray at the temples, and sharp, careful eyes that swept the room once before, settling on the assembled officers. She wore a simple uniform, practical rather than decorative, and she moved with the kind of quiet confidence Rhea associated with people who had spent a long career learning not to be surprised by much. "My name is Admiral Lin Zhao," she said, her voice carried through a translation device clipped to her collar, the assembly's own systems working in tandem to smooth the exchange. "I represent the Earth Defense Coalition. I understand you found the Long Watch." "We did," Vesa said, stepping forward, "along with a great many other ships, in a field far beyond the edge of this galaxy. I am Fleet Commander Vesa Oram, of the Wide Assembly. This is Captain Rhea Doss, who first discovered the site." Admiral Zhao's sharp eyes moved to Rhea, and something in her expression softened slightly, just for a moment. "Then you're the one who heard Aiko Ren's message." "Yes," Rhea said quietly. "I heard all of it." Zhao was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, grown softer, though no less steady. "The Long Watch launched 211 years ago, as part of what we called the Long Return Project. It was one of the earliest generation ships Earth ever built, sent out during a period we now call the Reaching Years, when we believed, wrongly as it turned out, that we could find habitable worlds beyond our own galaxy, faster than we actually could. We lost contact with the Long Watch a few decades after launch. We assumed it was gone. Destroyed, or simply lost to some failure too far away for us to ever learn the truth." "It wasn't destroyed," Rhea said. "It just kept going, as far as its engines could carry it. And even after that, even after everyone aboard had passed away, it kept facing home. Every ship out there does. There are thousands of them." Zhao closed her eyes for a moment, and Rhea realized, with a small shock, that the Admiral was fighting to keep her composure. "We built that promise into every ship because we couldn't bear the thought of losing people to the dark and having no way to remember them. Earth's early history was hard. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once, long before we ever reached the stars. When we finally did start reaching out, we made a decision as a species. Every ship would carry that promise. Face home. Always. No matter how far you go, no matter how lost you become, your ship remembers where it came from, even if you never make it back." "The Sentinel told us something similar," Vesa said carefully. "An old warship, still guarding the trail back to your system. It said it had waited over 200 years for someone to approach honestly, rather than by force." Something flickered across Zhao's face at that, sharp and guarded. "You met the Sentinel line." "We did. It let us pass, once we identified ourselves properly." Zhao nodded slowly, and for the first time since entering the room, something like real caution crept into her posture. "I won't lie to you, Commander. The Sentinel ships were built during a hard period in our history, not long after the Long Return Project began. We learned, more than once, that not everyone who found our lost ships out there meant us well. Some tried to use them. Some tried to follow the trail home and take what they found once they arrived. We stopped being naive about that a long time ago. The Sentinel line exists because we decided, as a species, that our dead deserved protecting, even out at the edge of everything, even after we could no longer protect them ourselves." The weight of that settled heavily over the room. Rhea thought of the endless field of ships, thousands of them, each one carrying its own small story of loss and stubborn hope. And she understood. with sudden clarity, why a species capable of building something so tender and so full of grief had also built something so capable of defending it. "We mean no harm," Vesa said quietly. "We came because we wanted to understand, and because, having found what we found, we felt it was owed to your people to let you know we had seen it, and that we understood, at least in part, what it meant." Zhao studied her for a long moment, then looked at Rhea again, her sharp eyes searching for something Rhea could not quite name. "You said you heard all of Aiko Ren's recording," Zhao said. "All of it?" "Yes," Rhea said. "Every entry. It took hours." "Most people who find one of our lost ships don't bother," Zhao said quietly. "If they even manage to translate the log at all, they usually stop after the first few lines. It's just data to them. A curiosity." She paused, and something in her expression shifted again, softening once more, though this time it looked closer to something like cautious hope. "You listened to all of it. That matters more than you probably realize." She turned to address the room more broadly, her voice steadying, taking on the measured tone of someone stepping carefully into a decision far larger than herself. "I cannot promise you an alliance today. That decision belongs to people well above my authority, and Earth has learned, through hard experience, not to rush into trusting strangers too quickly. But I can tell you this: you found our dead, out at the very edge of everything, and instead of using them or ignoring them, you listened. You brought their story back to us. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, exactly the kind of thing that might make my people willing to sit down and actually talk." Vesa inclined her head respectfully. "Then let us talk, Admiral Zhao. We have traveled a very long way to do exactly that." Outside the viewport, Earth continued to turn slowly in the light of its yellow star, blue and white, and quietly beautiful, exactly as Aiko Ren had once described it to her own grandmother, though she herself had never lived to see it. And far behind the assembled fleet, unseen but never quite forgotten, the ancient sentinel held its post, patient as ever, still watching over the long, silent trail of ships that had never stopped facing home. Aliens found human ships beyond the galaxy. Everyone was pointed at Earth. The talks between the wide assembly and Earth's defense coalition took months, far longer than Rhea had expected, though Admiral Zhao had warned her from the very first meeting that Earth did not rush into trust easily. There were councils and committees, endless rounds of questions, careful verification of everything the assembly claimed about itself, its history, its intentions. Rhea understood the caution, even if it tested her patience at times. A species that had built the Sentinel line, that had learned the hard way not to trust every stranger who came looking for their lost ships, had earned the right to move slowly. But slowly did not mean unfriendly, and over those months, Rhea found herself spending more and more time on Earth itself, first as part of the official diplomatic delegation, and later, once the early formalities had eased, simply because she wanted to be there. She remembered the first time she stood on solid ground beneath an open sky, on a green hillside not far from a coastal city Admiral Zhao had recommended she visit. The sky above her was a soft, pale blue, streaked with thin white clouds, and the air smelled of salt and growing things, in a way no ship's recycled atmosphere ever could. She thought of Aiko Ren's grandmother, who had described this exact kind of sky to a granddaughter who would never see it herself, and Rhea found she had to stand quietly for a long while before she trusted herself to speak. "It's a lot to take in, the first time," Admiral Zhao said, standing beside her, hands in the pockets of a plain jacket, looking entirely comfortable in a way Rhea envied a little. "Even for us, we forget sometimes how much we take it for granted, until we meet someone who never got the chance." "I keep thinking about the ships," Rhea admitted, "all of them, still out there, still facing this exact spot. It's strange, standing here now, knowing what's waiting for me, if I look back the way we came." Zhao nodded slowly. "We've started sending proper expeditions back out to the graveyard, now that the assembly's shown us the full extent of it. Turns out, it's even larger than your first survey suggested. Closer to 15,000 ships, once we finished a full count. Some of them are recoverable, in a manner of speaking. We've begun bringing pieces of the oldest ones home, when we can, to build proper memorials here on Earth. It felt wrong to leave them out there alone forever, now that we finally know exactly where they are." "And the Sentinel line?" Rhea asked. "Will you decommission it now?" Zhao was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same careful weight she seemed to give everything. Some of the older units, maybe, once we're certain the trail is truly safe. But I think we'll keep most of it running, at least for a while yet. Old habits, old promises, they don't disappear just because the danger seems to have passed. Besides, she gave Rhea a small, dry smile. It's not every day a lonely automated warship gets the chance to actually talk to someone after 2 centuries of silence. I think it deserves the chance to keep doing its job a little longer, now that it finally has some company out there worth talking to. Rhea laughed at that, softly, surprised by how easily it came. It had been months since she first found the Long Watch, drifting cold and silent at the edge of everything. And in that time she had learned more about grief and hope and stubborn, quiet love than in all her long years of careful, patient assembly service before it. The formal alliance between the Wide Assembly and Earth was signed nearly a year after Rhea's first discovery, in a ceremony held not in some grand hall, but on the same green hillside where she had first stood, beneath an open sky. It was Admiral Zhao's idea, she later learned, a small act of quiet symbolism, choosing an ordinary, beautiful place rather than a monument built for the occasion. A reminder that this alliance was, at its heart, about people finding each other again after a very long separation, not about grand displays of power. Vesa Oram stood beside Rhea during the ceremony, watching the exchange of formal documents with the same careful, measured expression she wore for most things, though Rhea thought she caught something softer in her eyes as the 2 delegations shook hands, human and Korath alike, under the pale blue Earth sky. "You were right, all those months ago," Vesa said quietly, as the small crowd began to disperse. "It wasn't a graveyard we found out there. It was a promise. And it seems that promise was worth keeping faith with, in the end." "I keep thinking about something Aiko Ren said, in her recording," Rhea said. "She said they were never a great empire, never conquered the stars. Just people who kept trying. Long after trying stopped making sense." She looked out over the green hills, the distant curve of the coastline, the small clusters of buildings scattered along the shore, and thought of the thousands of silent ships still waiting far beyond the galaxy's edge, patient as ever, still facing home. "I think that's exactly why they succeeded, in the end. Not despite the failures, because of how they carried them." Later that evening, Rhea found herself back aboard the Wanderer's Eye, preparing for a return trip to the graveyard, this time accompanied by a joint assembly and Earth expedition, the first of many planned surveys meant to properly honor and catalog every single ship out there, matching names to logs, families to lost relatives, promises to the people who had kept them. Tel worked quietly at the science station nearby, running final checks before departure, and Admiral Zhao herself had asked to come along for this particular trip, curious to see the graveyard with her own eyes for the first time. "It's strange," Zhao said, standing beside Rhea at the front viewport as the ship prepared to leave orbit, Earth still visible behind them, blue and bright against the black. "All my life, I grew up hearing stories about the Long Return Project, about ships that never came back, about the old rule that every vessel had to be built facing home. I always thought of it as something sad, a monument to failure, in a way. I never expected it would be the thing that finally brought someone else to our door." "I don't think it was failure," Rhea said. "Not really. I think it was patience. Your people built something that could wait, and hope, and remember, for as long as it took, and it worked. It took 200 years, but it worked." Zhao was quiet for a while, watching the stars shift slowly on the viewport as the ship gathered speed, leaving the familiar blue and white curve of Earth behind. "Do you think there are other species out there, doing something similar? Building their own version of the Long Return, in their own way?" Rhea considered the question carefully, thinking of the Wide Assembly's own slow, careful methods of exploration, so different from the wild, stubborn hope Aiko Ren had described, and yet not entirely unrelated either, both born from the simple, universal need to reach outward without losing sight of where one came from. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think, whatever ways they choose to remember, they're worth finding. The universe is very big, and very lonely, most of the time. It seems worth the effort, doesn't it? Looking for the people who never stopped hoping someone would come." Zhao smiled at that, a small, real smile, and looked back once more at the shrinking blue dot of Earth behind them, before turning her attention forward, toward the long dark road ahead. toward the endless field of patient, waiting ships that had, after 2 centuries of silence, finally been found. The journey back to the graveyard took the same long weeks as before, but this time, Rhea found she did not mind the slow pace nearly as much. She spent the hours talking with Zhao, learning more about Earth's long, difficult history, about the hardships that had shaped the Long Return project in the first place, about the quiet determination that had carried humanity from a single struggling world all the way out to the edge of the galaxy, and, eventually, all the way home again, even if it had taken outside help to finally close that final gap. When they arrived once more at the great silent field of ships, something had changed. It was no longer simply a graveyard, cold and forgotten, drifting unnoticed at the edge of everything. Assembly survey ships worked steadily among the derelicts now, alongside newly arrived human vessels, carefully cataloging each ship, recovering what could be recovered, honoring what could not. Rhea guided the Wanderer's eye gently past the Long Watch, the small ship that had started it all, and found, to her quiet surprise, that a human vessel had already arrived there ahead of them, its crew working carefully to install a small permanent marker near the old airlock, engraved with Aiko Ren's name and the dates of her long, patient life aboard the ship. "We're bringing her home," Zhao said softly, watching the work through the viewport. "Not the ship, not yet, that will take more time. But her name, her story. It belongs on Earth now, where people can remember her properly, the way she always hoped someone would." Rhea thought of the small blinking light she had first found aboard the Long Watch, faithfully guarding its lonely message for over 200 years, and felt something settle quietly in her chest, something that felt very much like peace. "She kept her promise," Rhea said. "Facing home, the whole time, right until the very end." "Yes," Zhao said, "and now, so do we." Outside the viewport, the great field of ships stretched on into the dark. Thousands of silent, patient vessels, each one still turned the same direction, each one still carrying its own small piece of an old, unbroken promise. But they were not alone anymore. Assembly ships moved carefully among them now, and human vessels too, working side by side, honoring what had been lost, and celebrating, quietly, what had finally been found. Far behind them, unseen but never forgotten, the ancient sentinel continued its long, patient watch, and somewhere far ahead, beneath a pale blue sky, a whole world waited, ready at last to welcome its wanderers home. And that, in the end, was the whole of it. Not a story of conquest, or glory, or grand adventure, but a much quieter, much stronger kind of story. A story about a species that never stopped facing home, no matter how far they traveled, no matter how much they lost along the way, and about the strangers from beyond the galaxy who found that promise, listened to it, and carried it, gently, all the way back to where it belonged.